now listening to Protecting Your Nest with board-certified family medicine and obesity medicine specialist Dr. Tony Hampton. For more, visit drtonyhampton.com. Welcome to the Protecting Your Nest podcast. When I wrote my first book, Fix Your Diet, Fix Your Diabetes, I wanted to give my patients and you a resource to help you reverse type 2 diabetes, and for those with type 1 diabetes, a better way to manage it. I recognized back then that so many people had been diagnosed with diabetes and something needed to be done. As a reminder, in 2019, the American Diabetes Association estimated that 37 million adults had diabetes and 96 million had pre-diabetes. That's 133 million Americans that have either diabetes or who are borderline for diabetes. And I'm sure those numbers are much higher for 2022. So although we are, now getting past the COVID pandemic, we still have a diabetes epidemic to deal with. When we consider the well-known complications of diabetes, including kidney and heart disease, nerve damage, and the problems with our feet, vision, and even our mental health, it's important that we do everything within our power to prevent and reverse diabetes. Thankfully, type 2 diabetes can be reversed, and type 1 diabetes can be effectively managed. My previous guest, Dr. Keith Runyon, wrote the book Master Type 1 Diabetes, and that's a great resource for anyone with type 1 diabetes wanting to achieve hemoglobin A1C's levels in the 5 range, with the risk of hypoglycemia also going away, which is huge for type 1 diabetics. Today's guest is also on a mission to reverse the diabetes epidemic, and like Dr. Runyon, has resources to help you achieve normal blood glucose control. Today's guest is Dennis Pollock. Dennis is a best-selling author of the books Overcoming Runaway Blood Sugar and 60 Ways to Lower Your Blood Sugar, where he shares his personal experience on how to successfully get your blood sugars to acceptable levels without resorting to a bland, boring diet. After creating a successful program to normalize his blood sugars, Dennis became an advocate for better, more abundant health, and he's also an evangelist and the former co-host of the Christ in Prophecy broadcast. As the founder of Spirit of Grace Ministries, he regularly leads conferences on Bible prophecy and spiritual renewal, along with conducting mission outreaches around the globe. Today, I wanted Dennis to share what he's learned, just like he does on his growing YouTube channel entitled Beat Diabetes, which has over 200,000 subscribers, and he's using that to guide people to do exactly that. With that, Dennis, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Protecting Your Nest podcast.
Well, thank you, Dr. Tony. I appreciate you inviting me to come on your program.
Well, we're kindred souls and we have similar missions, and I think we have to gather the troops as we
There you go.
Diabetes epidemic. And I was so happy to discover you and your channel. And I really am happy that my audience will get to know you better. And as we kind of continue to spread this healing message of metabolic health and beating diabetes. So let's start the conversation. I think about you and your wife. You guys are like a power couple. I'm really impressed with the work you guys are doing in the world. I know is how do you pronounce her name? Benedicta. So it's just like it looks. And she's from Nigeria. And that resonates with me because my youngest son is now dating someone who is from Nigeria. So it's been very interesting because it's a completely different culture. And so shout out to Justin and Aisha, who are, starting their couple journey together, and hopefully they'll be successful in that. And I also know that your wife also authored a book herself, When Destiny Calls. So it's really nice that she's had a chance to share her story. Hopefully will inspire people as well. So let's talk a little bit about how you and your lovely wife met.
Well, it was quite an experience. I was traveling to Africa several times a year doing missions, and I was single. And when you're a Christian and you're single and you're wanting a wife, you pray, right? You ask God to give you a wife. And I came to realize it had been a while, but I came to realize that wife seeking and the whole dating thing, especially when you're a middle-aged man, it can be pretty brutal. And so I was a little leery of doing anything too fast. And in fact, when I went to Nigeria, the time that I met my wife, I was thinking, okay, this is all business. I'm done for a while looking for a wife. You know, it's too much hassle. I'll get back to it later. But when I saw Benedicta, she was actually recording some of the meetings with the camera, and just drop dead gorgeous, just a beautiful lady. And of course, being a single guy praying for a wife, you start thinking, but still, the idea of me really ever getting to know her very well seemed unlikely, because you can't just walk up to her and say, hey, can we get to know each other, especially when you're separated by an entire ocean. So
Right.
all I could do was admire her. But toward the end of the meeting, she had been, like I said, she had been recording a lot of these meetings. She was trying to put together a video, and she wondered if she could interview me. And so she came up to the car just before I was about to leave the meetings, and asked, could I interview you? And I'm kind of in shock, trying to be cool about it, because here's this one of the most beautiful women I've ever seen wanting to interview me. And I'm thinking, well, maybe there's a chance after all. So long story short, I got her phone number. I asked her, would it be okay if I called you when I get back to America? She gave a very non-committal answer. She said, it's okay. And I thought, well, that doesn't sound too exciting. It's okay. I was hoping more like, yeah, that would be great or something. But we hit it off over the phone, and so anyway, we got to know each other, and those were our dates mostly. I did get back one time for the engagement party slash traditional wedding. But anyway, it's worked out beautifully, and she loves the Lord. She loves to preach, and she's been useful in the beat diabetes thing as well. So, and everybody loves her. I think I come in third with beat diabetes. The two stars of the program are Mike, the glucose meter, and Benedicta, and then way down the line somewhere is me.
That's funny. It's funny you say that, because my wife, I've been married now for 29 years. I got lucky and met my wife in college at Xavier in New Orleans. And when I go to like Low Carb USA, now called the Symposium for Metabolic Health, the way we're usually, when we see people that know us, they'll say, or when they see me, they say, "Hey, Tony, nice to see you. Where's Karan?" My wife's name is Karan. They have no interest in me. It's my wife who they're interested in. It's
Yeah.
always funny to me that they react that way. So I think my wife's going to love hearing your love story, how things got started. And I guess your wife was just, getting the records together for the future relationship. That's why she was sent from above to record you. That was just
I could not help but notice her, because number one, she was standing up with this camera recording a lot of the meetings, and number
right. That's
two,
right.
she was taller than almost all of the women. She's a very tall lady, and number three, like I said, she was beautiful. So I just couldn't have possibly missed her.
That's awesome. Well, it looks like you and your wife have obviously done a lot of mission work in the nations of Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Nigeria, of course. And for you personally, what led to you wanting to do that work? And when you do that work, is it spiritual focus, health focus, both? How does all of that work out?
Yeah, well, to answer the last question first, it is primarily focused spiritually. We do provide medical clinics as a free gift to the people, so they really appreciate that. I don't get involved heavily with trying to give talks about diabetes or anything. In some ways, I would like to, but not being a doctor, I just leave it. We bring in doctors and nurses, and they work with people. And of course, it's not just diabetes. Malaria is a big problem in Africa, and a number of other things. As to why I got into it in the first place, um, obviously I'm a Christian, and I take God seriously. I take Christ seriously. And ever since I was a young believer, my I was captured and captivated by the 15th chapter of the Gospel of John, where Jesus said, "If you will abide in me, you will bear much fruit." And I just got hold of that, and I started praying, Lord, I want to be fruitful. I want to bear much fruit. I don't want to bear a little fruit. I don't want to bear a medium amount of fruit. I want to bear much fruit. And so I think that was part of it. Part of another aspect of it was as a young pastor, I watched a video by the late Reinhard Bonnke, who preaches in Africa, or did. He's dead now, but and he was preaching and praying for the sick. And as I watched him and saw the huge crowds being touched by God, I just cried. I was just in tears. And I was like, Lord, if you could ever do that, that would be so great. Now, I've never reached the level of Reinhard Bonnke, but in my own small way, I have done that, and God opened the door. At the time when I prayed that, I didn't know how I could do it. I didn't know anybody in Africa. I didn't have the money to go to Africa. I had no connections. It seemed like, how could this ever happen? But God worked it out, and I don't have time to tell all the details, but I found myself headed for Kenya in 2004, and I saw more fruit, more people give their lives to Christ, more blessing, more anointing, more of all the stuff that any minister wants in that one meeting that I had in like 10 years of preaching in the U.S. So, if you're a fisherman, you go where the fish are, right?
Yes.
And when I saw the fruitfulness, the blessing, it's like, I got to do this some more. And God made a way for that to happen.
Yeah, when I got my MBA, it was called ROI, Return on Investment. So, and that's, you just decided this makes more sense. And that's one of the reasons why I call myself the metabolic health doctor. I think there's more return on investment. You heal more people, just focus on that one thing. All of these other medical conditions get better. So I like your business acumen. You're a very smart man, being efficient. And I love that. So let's think about the medical component for a moment. You clearly are able to share your healing message through your faith, and now you're spreading the gospel of low carb, right? So when you think about like what you struggled with, could you talk a little bit about how you went from that previous life of being a diabetic, struggling, and then you found this, what got better? Talk to me a little bit about how that transition occurred.
Yeah. Well, in the early stages, when I was starting to have blood sugar problems, I was just pretty ignorant, in spite of the fact that my mother had had diabetes, had lost both of her legs to diabetes, and eventually her life. So I knew diabetes was bad, but I knew nothing about it. What started happening to me that got my attention was I was having what's known as reactive hypoglycemia, and that is where your blood sugar will jump up pretty high after a high carb meal, and then it will dive very low. Now, when my blood sugar would jump up high, I didn't feel anything too much, and I wasn't too worried about that, and of course, I didn't know it was happening. When it would go low, I'd feel it for sure, and I would get shaky, and I would feel like I was about to pass out. And one time I did pass out. I was actually in church, and I had had a big bowl of raisin bran, and somehow that had really jacked my sugar up high, and then it dove low about 3 or 4 hours later, and I passed out. And they called for the medics, the paramedics, and they came and they tested my blood sugar. I had been revived at that point, and it read with just the letters LO, low. It didn't even give a number. And when a glucose meter reads low or HI, high, you're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So so I struggle with that, and I didn't have any idea of how do you fix it, what's wrong. Why is this happening to me? I suspected it had something to do with blood sugar, but I didn't really know anything about it. I read one guy who said, you'll fix all your problems if you go to a plant-based diet and forget all the meat. The meat is your problem.
Mm-hmm.
I went plant-based. I became a vegetarian. My problems got 10 times worse. I was having all kinds of episodes of high and low blood sugar. And it really began to change for me when the secretary at the ministry where I worked, whose husband was a severe diabetic, brought me a glucose meter and taught me how to use it. And I'll never forget that afternoon. I was having episodes at work, and I think she figured out this guy's probably diabetic and doesn't know it. And because I didn't have a lot of money and I didn't have health insurance, I didn't go to the doctor. I should have, but I didn't. So she brought me a blood sugar meter, and that afternoon she showed me how to use it. It took several stabs to, get the blood to come out properly and do the test. But the test didn't turn out to be too bad. But as I tested more, and I got addicted to testing my blood sugar. I mean, I became fanatical about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that my blood sugar was going up. And about an hour after I ate, it would go way high, up to 200 or more, sometimes less, depending on what I ate. And then 3 or 4 hours later, it'd be down to 60 or something like that, which is too low. So I'm bouncing all over the place. But I'm doing a lot of reading. I read a book by a lady that was a patient of Dr. Bernstein, and that led me to read some of Dr. Richard Bernstein's books. And they said the exact opposite of what I had read earlier, which is do the low carb. You'll manage your blood sugar much better with low carb than you would with high carb. And they acted like there's no problem with eating meat. Just make sure you watch those carbs and sugars. So I began to do that, and lo and behold, within a very, very short time, it took me a while to figure it all out and figure out what is low carb and what isn't. Because we're programmed to think about what are the healthy foods.
Right.
And of course, fruits and vegetables and grains and cereals, those are all the healthy foods. So you start out with that mentality. These must be good. So if I knock off the ding-dongs and the Twinkies and the chocolate chip cookies, I'm going to be fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I found out that's not enough. That's a good start, but that's not enough. But as I tested more, I began to realize a banana can raise my blood sugar just as high as a candy bar.
That's right.
And so after a while, I started using my glucose meter to vet my meals and my foods and to figure out which ones worked for me and which ones didn't. And after a while, I got it figured out. And my blood sugar just became very stable, very normal. And everything worked beautifully. So, and I'm a natural writer and a thinker and an analyzer. So after a while, I thought, I've really seen some success. I'm going to write a book about it. And that's where the Overcoming Runaway Blood Sugar came about. And I sent out books to all kinds of, manuscripts and query letters to all kinds of publishing companies. I got rejected by every single one.
Mm-hmm.
But finally, there was a journal that advertised books to some of these publishing companies. And I got a little blurb of mine about my book in it. And one lady that worked for Harvest House Publishing Companies who had blood sugar issues herself saw that. And she wanted the manuscript just to see if it could be of any use to her. Mm-hmm. And she was having all kinds of diabetic symptoms and shakiness and just all kinds of stuff. So she read the manuscript and she started applying it. And within a month or two, her symptoms started going away and she was feeling so much better. And she became my biggest promoter to her company. They're like, we don't know this guy. Who is he? He hasn't written anything. But she just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And finally, they decided we'll take a chance. And it ended up selling, I don't know, something like 125,000 copies, which for a nobody like me was pretty good.
Wow. Well, if there's a such thing as not having faith, you'll start to gain it just hearing your story, because it just seems like there's something bigger making all of this come to fruition. So I really appreciate that. And for those who are checking us out and you're like, how can fruit, do worse than a candy bar? It doesn't really make sense at first. And it did make sense to me as well until I started to think about, the fruit doesn't have certain things in it that the candy bar does have. It has fat in it, and it definitely has protein. And those things, one of the things I tell people about a smoothie, if you're going to eat a smoothie, you need to add an avocado or something. Just add some fat so it'll help to blunt the spike. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. I also want to acknowledge how horrible it is to have hypoglycemia. I remember when I talked to Dr. Runyon, and I think Dr. Runyon and Dr. Bernstein, to me, are people who people should know because they're very much focused on type 1 diabetes. And people with type 1 diabetes tend to have more of those hypoglycemic episodes. And imagine just being confused and sweaty and anxious and weak and shaky and lightheaded and all those things. And it's just not a lot of fun. So there's a lot of reasons why people have hypoglycemia. A lot of times because of their medicine. Sometimes they don't know why it's happening. Sometimes because they just drank alcohol. Sometimes it's because they had a gastric bypass and they're more prone to it. It doesn't really matter. It's just a horrible thing to have. So in order to reduce hypoglycemia, if you're a diabetic, you have to use, if you're on insulin, for example, you have to have a lifestyle to go with the insulin. And if you don't have a lot of variability in your numbers, you're more likely to control your numbers. So when you eat those plant-based foods, you're going to have more variability. That's why the steak will serve you better than the spinach, believe it or not, even though the spinach is not really that starchy. So let's think a little bit about you as a person who's out here teaching, and you're not a doctor, as you've mentioned, you're not a nurse, you're not an advanced practice clinician, you're not a dietitian, but you've become a diabetic educator with your wonderful YouTube channel. And what's funny about your YouTube channel is I thought about the other organizations that have been charged to teach this message of how to improve your diabetes, like the American Diabetes Association. And yet when I went to their site, they only had 17,000 subscribers. And so that's a little bit more than what I have at this point, but you have over 200,000 subscribers. So that's a kind of a tremendous responsibility when you have way more subscribers than the American Diabetes Association. So pinch yourself, which is really interesting. So I guess my question for you is, what is it about, how do you feel about you spreading this healing message to help people with diabetes when you have these other organizations out there who in theory should be doing that work? How do you feel your role is in the big picture?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I have to admit I've often wondered that myself, and talked to the Lord about it. When I first got interested in YouTube and recording, I spent a lot of time learning things about cameras and lights and audio and making videos and all that stuff, microphones. And I was kind of fascinated by it, but on the other hand, I was kind of feeling guilty about it because it's like I'm a minister, I'm a preacher. Jesus is what I care about. How can I take this time? How can I justify taking all this time to learn about microphones and cameras and lighting when I should be writing articles and preaching the gospel? But and I started YouTube with the diabetes channel, and at first it didn't do much for about a year, kind of piddled around, gained a few people here and there, and then it just took off. And suddenly it started sucking up all my time, more than the ministry even, and that made me even feel more guilty. But after a while, I came to realize this is God's calling on my life. It's not his only calling, but it's part of his calling. And it goes all the way back to those early years when I was in my 20s praying, Lord, use me. Jesus, you said if we'd abide in you, we'd bear much fruit. And it's like this is part of the fruit he wanted to produce through me. Now, I will freely admit, I don't know as much in terms of the studies, in terms of the science, as most of the doctors and nutritionists, probably all of them, do. But he's given me enough knowledge, and he's made me a communicator, writing and speaking, teaching and ranting. That's kind of what I do. And there are some people who are very knowledgeable. They're just not good speakers, and they don't communicate very well. So God has taken my little gift to communicate, and he's given me enough understanding and enough of victory in diabetes myself that he's like, share it with others. And the testimonies keep pouring in. I mean, I don't think there's a day goes by we don't hear from some. And I mean, some are just so crazy, amazing. It's just hard to believe. Guys that go from like a 10 A1C to a 4.8 in 3 months.
Yeah.
Like, how does that happen? And you go to the typical endocrinologist even, or medical doctor, what's your record? And a lot of the people that have followed my channel, their doctor tells them, I've never seen, and these are doctors that have been practicing for 20 and 30 years. They say, I've never seen anybody get the kind of results you got.
Mm-hmm.
And now sometimes they say, well, I'm following this guy named Dennis Pollock, and the doctors are like, oh yeah, I've heard of him. So even some of the doctors are starting to hear about me. But I give God the glory for it all. It was His plan. I never prayed to be a diabetes educator. I never really wanted to be, although now
Right.
I'm glad because I can see He's using it. Here's what I feel though. It's like God loves people so much. Number one, He wants them well. He doesn't want them sick and miserable. And number two, He wants them to see an evangelical that is reasonable, that can help them.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the people that follow me, they've never known somebody like me. That is an evangelical Christian who reads the Bible, goes to church, sings praise songs. They've never known anybody like me because all their circle of friends are people that don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So when they see me, and I don't push it, Jesus, I don't push the Bible, but I don't hide it either. And when I have been able to help them, and they know I've helped them, it's hard for them to talk too badly about Christianity and Christians anymore. So I began to realize this is God's little sneaky plan to
Mm-hmm.
glorify His name through this little Texas minister by helping people to overcome their diabetes.
I love it. I do believe that you have met your calling, and sometimes it's not what people think it's going to be. I think for me, it's definitely spread the healing potential of achieving metabolic health and reach as many people as possible so we can feel less guilty about not being in the clinic. Because if I'm in a clinic, Dr. Ken Berry told me this. He said, listen, you can reach, 25 people in a day, or you can reach 25,000. It's up to you. But it's not, you shouldn't feel guilty that environment that you are in is different than the way you were trained. So although I'm doing both and I'm a, leader in my health system, you just never know. And with technology evolving so much, who knows what we'll be doing 5 years from now? It just kind of keeps changing, and who knows? So maybe we'll be in drones somewhere doing some really weird things. Who knows? But yeah. So I think again, if you feel in your soul that this is what you should be doing, then it's what you should be doing. So now we spoke briefly about fruit and how fruit can be the equivalent of sugar. A banana can have 28 carbs divided by 4 is 7 teaspoons of sugar. Nobody, thinks about that, but that's what it is. Your body doesn't distinguish between the so-called unhealthy sugars and the healthy sugars, So now when you think about when you talk to people that you speak to, whether it's through YouTube, at the church, elsewhere, family, friends, other than fruit, are there certain things that you tell them you may want to be cautious about eating that? What types of things do you tell them to avoid?
Well, besides, I mean, I don't even emphasize sugar so much because everybody knows that's bad. That's
Mm-hmm.
not news. I mean, whether you're coming from it as a vegan or paleo or almost any diet in the world other than the standard diet, everybody acknowledges sugar is bad. And when the person first gets diagnosed as a diabetic, usually that's the first thing to go. All right, I can't eat cake. Now, for some
Mm-hmm.
people, they do struggle with that, but they at least know it's not good. So I talk more about things like fruit, like starches, potatoes, and corn, starchy things, and then the grains. One of the biggest shocks to people, one of the most surprising realities, is that oatmeal is not good for a diabetic. It will
I
drive your
know.
blood sugar crazy. And they've been hearing all their life that oatmeal is the healthiest food you can eat. If you have to be stuck on a deserted island for a year and you can only take one food, take your oatmeal, baby. Take that oatmeal because that'll
That's
keep you
right.
healthy. And yet, and of course, the thing that I emphasize so much is do postprandial tests. I don't call them postprandial, I call them post meal, but do post meal tests and find out how high you're going to spike after you have a meal. So if you
Mm-hmm.
want to defend oatmeal and you want to tell me how much grandma told you oatmeal was good, that's fine. Take your glucose meter, eat your big bowl of oatmeal for breakfast, and about an hour later, an hour after you finish, test yourself and see where you jump to. And most people find their bodies don't tolerate it very well, and that will be true for bananas. It'll be true for most apples, unless it's a small tart apple. So many. Now, the berries, a lot of us can get away with them, and I'll have a few strawberries here and there, or blueberries or blackberries, but most of the other fruit, the glucose meter doesn't like them. And
Mm-mm.
I've learned that if Mike doesn't like, I call it my glucose meter, Mike the meter. If Mike doesn't like a particular food, then I don't like it. I go with Mike. I go with my glucose meter. I wouldn't matter if every doctor in the entire world lined up and held hands and chanted, Dennis, you know, eat fruit, Dennis, eat fruit. I would listen to Mike the meter over everybody else, every nutritionist, every doctor. Thank the Lord it's not every doctor. Doctors like you and others are realizing this as well. But for me, it's just very practical. I'm a very much a bottom line guy. It's like I want to get from point A to point B as fast as I can. So if I'm going from Dallas to Houston, I could take all kinds of side roads and I could take 3 days to get there. Or I can jump on the main Highway 75 that turns into 45 and I can be down there in 5 hours. So I like to get there as fast as I can. And if you're diabetic with an A1C of 10, 12, 14, and your body is being damaged every day by that kind of high glucose and high insulin, get on the fastest highway you can to get down. And the fastest highway is carbohydrate restriction. And that doesn't just mean the cakes, the pies, the candy bars. It means the starches, the grains, and the fruits.
Yeah, all of that's true. And I think I'm happy to meet your friend Mike. Shout out to Mike. Everybody wants to be like Mike.
Yeah.
What I like about Mike is that it's evidence, right? And we have feelings, but it's nice to have some evidence. So you having Mike in your life is very, very good. I just did a video about fiber, and the video was basically saying that it's not essential to life, and you don't need fiber to not be constipated, just like the lion and the tiger don't need it, and the Eskimos who eat fish don't need it. But I had to show science, so I had to put a study in the video to say this is the trial, this is a randomized controlled trial that showed that not only do you not need fiber to not have, to not feel bad with bloating and abdominal pain and constipation, but you actually do better when you don't have fiber, which is I knew intuitively that was true because I did get bloated when I ate fiber, but nobody could have told me when I was a vegetarian if fiber was a bad thing. I'm not saying it's bad. I think you use it if you need it. But for me, it was reassuring to know that it wasn't necessary. So it's really good to have everybody who listens or watches this episode to understand. Do your experiment like Dennis did and see what your body likes, doesn't like. And I love continuous glucose monitors and other ways to measure that. I think that is like giving us the evidence that we need. As you've shared this message of what it takes to beat diabetes, are you finding that people are leaning towards low carb, keto, ketovore, carnivore? Are people leaning, or do you see just a vast variety of people kind of coming to the table when you interact with people?
Yeah, I think as long as it's low carb, they diverge into different streams, and carnivore is something that has just become popular the last several years, and then just basic low carb, and then there's the question of how low carb do you have to be low carb? Is it 75 grams of carbs per
Right.
day? Is it 50? Is it 20? And I'm kind of a practical, pragmatic kind of a guy. I just believe if it will work for you, if you can get your glucose down and everything humming along beautifully, eating 75 grams of carbs per day, I'm not going to tell you otherwise. I
Yeah.
normally recommend people eat 2 meals a day, separated by 6 hours, and then just that's it.
Yeah.
But I had one lady, I think it was a lady that left a comment and said, well, I eat 3 meals. And then she started telling me the kind of low carb food diet she had. And she said, I'm down to 4.8. I told her, I wouldn't tell you to change a thing. It's obviously working for you. So just because you don't follow my 2 meals a day plan, if you got a 4.8, I'm not going to touch that at all. You just keep on doing what you're doing. And so, but one way or the other, the science and data and your glucose meter, they all will testify carbs drive blood sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And more than that, they drive high insulin if you've got a working pancreas. Now, if you're a type 1, then you can eat all the carbs you want, and you won't have high insulin because
Mm-hmm.
you don't produce any. But if you're a type 2 with a working pancreas, your insulin's going to be way up there as well. And guys like Dr. Benjamin Bickman and others are saying, hey, that insulin is a problem all by itself. And it's probably more trouble than the high glucose, but they're both a problem. And carbohydrates drive that. Now, a lot of people will come up with the thought, yeah, but there have been societies in the past that have eaten lots of rice, or they've eaten sweet potatoes, and they've been healthy. And my response would be, yeah, but they didn't eat Snicker bars, they didn't eat cakes, pies, and drink Coca-Colas, and they were all skinny back in those old days that they're talking about. You don't find that anymore. But yeah, there was a time where people were skinny, they walked everywhere they went, and they did eat sweet potatoes and rice and stuff and stayed healthy. But we're not in that time anymore. If you could go back and live like they did and eat like they did and be as skinny as they were, you can eat sweet potatoes too. But for old, heavier people, you probably ought to stay away from those sweet potatoes.
Yeah, and I just love the idea that you're very pragmatic about your approach. I try to be as well. And in fact, one of the reasons why I decided to say metabolic health doc instead of low carb doc is because I'm pragmatic. I'm like, hey, whatever works, I'm happy with. I tell patients, I tell them, don't be as concerned about the scale. Focus on achieving metabolic health. So if that is achieved at 100 carbs, because you can technically be low carb at 130 or less if you look at the various parameters that are out there. But if you're metabolically healthy at 75 carbs, have at it. If it takes 50 or 20, whatever it takes for you. And I think that's the goal. So if your blood pressure is okay, your blood sugar is okay, your waist is not too round, and you have your triglycerides and your HDL, which are better predictors of heart disease than the LDL, then I think we're okay. And I think that's a cleaner message. I'm also interested in getting our plant-based folk closer to where the animal-based folk are. And I think a better way to achieve that is by focusing on metabolic health. And then we can kind of work through the nuances, but I think we really want to work together to achieve the same goal. In fact, speaking of that, when you think about our healthcare system, I know you had some experiences personally in terms of how you interacted and you had to do your own research, but what would you like to see change in our healthcare system if you could just, a magic wand? I just listened to Sean Baker announce, and I think I commented on the video, that they're starting to hire people. He raised about $5 million, and they're going to start doing research, and they're going to have a team of people doing the research, hire clinicians, and get people on these different dietary patterns where you reduce the carbs. And so it's almost like a center of excellence for that model, right? But what would you like to see change if you could just use your magic wand?
Well, you might know better than me, but from what I understand, most doctors go through their entire medical school with almost no insights and lessons and classes in nutrition, maybe one max. To me, that's criminal. How can you train a doctor to be a healing practitioner and not give him some insights in nutrition? And it's like most doctors see it as my job is to diagnose the illness, granted, and prescribe the medicine. But and that can work for a lot of things. And if necessary, give them surgery. That can work. That can be helpful. But with diabetes, there's no medicine that can fix it. There is no medicine that's going to turn you around and take someone from a 10. I mean, you can back it off a little bit, but not much. And generally, the best you can do, kind of the refrigerator process of the way I look at it. It's like you can take fruit and put it in a refrigerator, and you'll slow down the decay rate, but it'll still rot. If you put that apple in that refrigerator for 8-10 months, you're going to have a rotten apple. You slowed it down. You didn't fix it. And I think that's how it is with a lot of the medications that are prescribed for diabetes. They can slow down the rate of destruction of your body, but they can't fix it. They can't turn it around. So if I could fix anything in the healthcare world, I would say get these doctors trained by knowledgeable people that can show the power of lifestyle to do things for diabetes that no medicine can. The reality is, if I could come up with a pill that worked as powerfully as a low carb diet, I could be a millionaire overnight. Everybody would want to buy that pill.
That's
But when
right.
you tell them, well, you're going to have to drop potatoes, you're going to have to change your diet, change your lifestyle, start exercising, he's like, I don't know about that. That's too much work. But if you can give me a pill, baby, I'm ready. And there is no pill. There are pills that can help slow it down, like I said, but not fix it.
Yeah, you're right about the education. When I looked it up in the past, it was 19 to 24 hours of nutrition education for most doctors, which is, not a lot. And
And
it's
then there's the question of what are they being taught?
not what we're talking about. That's for sure. It's mostly understanding what vitamins do. It's understanding how to feed somebody if they're unable to feed themselves. It's rarely a patient comes in front of you and you need to advise them about diet. What do you do? What do you tell them? That's not what it is. And until it gets to that level and it respects different dietary patterns, there's no one size fit alls. In fact, when we did our video short, that basically talked about why we have faith in low carb. One of the things I shared were the various organizations that endorse low carb now. But what you'll also notice is that they also endorse low fat and Mediterranean and paleo, et cetera. So we have to give people choices and then and share why we have choices that we feel are going to help them. But yeah, I just think that how we're going to teach the future generation is going to matter. So I think we have to teach metabolic health and why lifestyle is the only way to achieve it. And like you said, if you can bottle that up into a pill, it would be the number one drug in the country. And it's important because metabolic health fixes 70% of the chronic illnesses. So one pill would actually fix a whole lot of things. But that's, so that's like, so my goal is also that we should have a metabolic health specialty, where people are trained to actually just treat metabolic health while incorporating it into all the various disciplines. Every surgeon should know about metabolic health. How can a gastroenterologist not know about nutrition? And all the food goes through that tube that they're supposed to be an expert at. So I think that those types of things need to change. And until that happens, we will continue to just be managing disease instead of healing people. So I appreciate your thoughts on that. I do want to ask you briefly. I did notice that your Spirit of Grace Ministries has a channel as well. And so my question is, when you're in front of that audience, the teaching's a lot different. So what are you sharing on that YouTube channel as opposed to your Beat Diabetes channel?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you bringing that up. You know, even in cases where I help diabetics to get their blood sugar down to normal and they're feeling better, their complications are receding, the reality is they're still going to die. They may have bought themselves an extra 10 years of good health or 15 years, and that's priceless. I mean, there's no amount of money that you would make it worthwhile to not have that, but they're still going to die. What I believe is that when you put your faith in Jesus Christ, you'll live forever. And then I believe that once you do become a believer, the Bible has a lot to say about how you live successfully, live with your wife, your husband, how you raise your children, how you interact with people. The Bible is a great big book. It's got a lot to say. And I'm a Bible teacher. I've always been a reader, a teacher, a communicator. And so I love to teach the Bible. I love to teach all kinds of subjects and on the Bible. And Benedict and I sometimes do table studies where we just talk about the Bible and discuss different stories. And then I do these devotional talks, usually around 7-8 minutes. And I will take all kinds of subjects like predestination, or once you're a believer in Christ, can you still sin? And all just all kinds of things like that. And basically show them enough scripture so that they'll understand this is coming from the Bible. And so we get a crossover. We get people from Beat Diabetes coming over and getting interested. So I think that's really cool, and that really blesses me. So yeah, I'm happy to do both.
That's excellent. And again, I think if you can reach people in a convenient way and they can kind of get to it when it's convenient, that's the gift of a platform like YouTube. So I really think that's awesome. And I'm happy that you're reaching more people that way as well. Um, you've been given a gift to teach the word of God. You've been given permission to preach, but a lot of people who learn about metabolic health and low carb, they want to get a little preachy too, right? So so what advice would you give the average person checking this out today on how they can, maybe interact with their friends or family, but in a way that's not too preachy, because we don't want to, be too. It's so exciting to know that this works, right? And you see people, with metabolic health and insulin resistance, you can literally see a dark patch on somebody's neck and know that they have it. You can literally see somebody who has skin tags and know that they have it, right? So you can almost know just walking into the barbershop, which I went to today, who has it. How do I not be too preachy in those moments?
Yeah. Well, I think that's something we all struggle with because we want to help people. We want to share, and when you're excited about, that's why I wrote my first book. I was so excited about the victory I was seeing. Is like, I've got to share this. Wasn't sure if I could get it published or not, but so you want to help people. I think there has to be a sort of a desperation for most. I mean, this so many people in America have grown up with the standard American diet, grown up eating all the sweets. They think that's normal.
Mm-hmm.
I look at it today, and when I see them, I go into Walmart and I see all these pastries and these sugary treats and the candies and the white bread and all that stuff. I look at it as poison. But that's a totally different thinking from most people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like evangelism with winning people to Christ. Somebody has to sort of be ready for that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the good news is there's a lot of diabetics that are ready, and that's why my channel has done well and others' channels have done so well. Because when your doctor has said you're diabetic and they hear that D word, they get scared. And a lot of times their vision is starting to blur and they're urinating all the time and they're having all kinds of issues. They're scared and they will listen to almost anybody. And if you can speak a reasonable message and you can give them some data and you can show them how their meter can help them, they will listen, and they do, to me and to others. So it's kind of funny. When I first got on YouTube, I started watching a few of the guys that teach you how to do YouTube and how to be an effective YouTuber. One of the things they will always tell you is you've got to find a little niche. Don't try to be too wide. Don't try to be too broad and cover every little thing. Find a little small area where people have a need or a desire and stay with that niche. And I thought, well, diabetes is perfect. I didn't say, all right, I got to find a niche, so I'll do diabetes. I was already doing diabetes, but it's like, well, that's perfect because people that are diabetic are usually pretty desperate. Sadly, oftentimes their doctor can't help them out too much because he doesn't know too much, and so he may give them a blood sugar meter, but may not even know what to tell them about how to use it, when to use it, or may not even do that. So they're kind of looking around, and in some cases, they feel like they've got a death sentence. And if they hear some hope, I mean, hope is so powerful. I mean, hope is powerful. And if you give somebody a reason to hope when they've been feeling like there was no hope, they will sit up and they will listen to you. I mean, here I am, an outspoken Christian. I mean, I get Muslims listening to me and Hindus listening to me and atheists listening to me. And a lot of times they'll leave comments. They'll say, well, I don't believe like you do, but praise God for you or something like that.
Right.
Because you gave them some hope and then they begin to see things working out. And it's like, wow, he was right.
That's beautiful, and that's kind of the world we want to live in. I mean, it is the United States of America. We should have our own belief systems and exist next to our neighbors who have different belief systems. So I think that's incredibly powerful. So I want to kind of wrap up with a couple of questions. One is a fun question. Then I'll ask you about, how you plan to, protect your nest over the next 12 months. The first question was inspired by my wife, and I heard through the grapevine that you have one of your favorite shows back in the day was the same as hers, which was Andy Griffin, right? So I wanted to ask you, what do you love about the Andy Griffin show? Because I know we watch it a lot at my house.
Yeah. Well, what is not to love about the Andy Griffith Show? Incredibly well written. It's humorous without resorting to a lot of crazy jokes. It's kind of sad. So many of the modern sitcoms, which I just don't watch, but if I ever happen to glance a few minutes of one, they'll tell these raunchy jokes and then they'll put on a laugh track and it'll make it supposed to seem like, well, this has got to be funny because listen to all the laughing, recorded laughter that we're playing. But with Andy, and they do have recorded laughter too, but still, it's genuinely funny. It harkens back to a simpler time. Mm-hmm. And I think we all kind of wish we could be there. We can't. But still, I just enjoy that, and my wife does too. A lot of times we'll sit down and have our lunch and watch Andy Griffith, or we've got several of the cleaner shows we watch. Believe it or not, Leave It to Beaver. That shows you how corny I am. Sanford and Son we've watched. So yeah, we have our little lunchtime 25-minute shows. We sit down, take a break, have our lunch, watch one of these old time shows, and then get on with our day.
Yeah, well, ironically, we watched Sanford and Son just the day before this recording, so okay. you had me at hello. And I think this simpler times theme is probably what my wife would say. She likes the simpler. She is a Southern belle. She grew up in Mississippi, and some of those years were not in Jackson, the so-called city. It was in the country, the Port Gibsons and the Ferguson, Mississippi. So I think you guys are kindred spirits for sure. So I appreciate that. And as we wrap up, my nest and rope is grounded in the basic concept that if we understand how to, heal from the root causes of disease, we'll be successful. And it requires us to, the nest says, hey, nutrition, exercise, less stress, more sleep, making sure we think in a way that serves us and avoiding trauma. And then the rope says we got to be in healthy relationships. We have to avoid the organisms and pollutants that harm us, and we have to protect our emotions, and our life experiences must serve us, like the experience of talking to you today is serving me and my audience. So when you think about the nest and rope, what aspect of that do you want to focus on over the next year?
Well, that's a good question. Basically, to me, all that you described, or most all of what you described, is kind of summed up by a relationship with God through His Son Jesus Christ. The Bible says all kinds of things like a cheerful heart does good like a medicine. Just being a positive person. They say one of the marks of people that make it to be 100 years old is they have a positive outlook on life. Mm-hmm. That's going to carry you a ways. And of course, knowledge, like you and I have been talking about with the whole issue of diabetes and the low carb, it takes some knowledge. But in relationships, Jesus was asked, what's the most important laws of all? And He said, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Well, He's talking about relationships, right? Love God, have a relationship with Him. Love people, have a relationship with them. We're not called to be an island. We're not called to just hunker down and hope the world will go away. We're called to interact with people, love people, bear with people, work with people. And so, that's what I always want to focus. Now, I'm an old guy, and so I don't interact as much. I work out of my home mostly, and I'm not quite as involved with lots of people as I was when I was younger. And then during the COVID times, I haven't gotten out to Africa as much as normal. But, doing what I can and hopefully get back to Africa this next year and resume with that. Although it's kind of a killer. The travel, the ministry is great, but the travel, it's terrible.
I know that's real travel for sure. I remember taking those long flights. So yeah, I really appreciate you. Again, I want to make sure you protect your nest because I think the work you guys are doing is amazing. And more people unfortunately are kind of relying on not the larger organizations, but people who have experiences, clinicians who have experiences that put them on a different path. And so, and even when those organizations catch up, and they're starting to, as I suggested, with them starting to recommend low carb as a dietary option, we need to always have people on the front lines. I'm always surprised, and I'm sure you experience this, at the number of people who they haven't heard any of this stuff. You kind of live it, but they come to you and it's like you have to start all over again. So it's never, we can never be bored with repeating the same message over and over again. Never be bored with that, because people are kind of in their own silos and they haven't heard these messages. So I really appreciate you. So let's wrap up with you sharing the best ways for my audience to find the work you're doing.
To find the work that I'm doing? Well, that would be go to YouTube and type in my name, Dennis Pollock. That's Pollock. And you'll find both my videos. I'm in my YouTube channels. Dennis Pollock is the name of one, Beat Diabetes the name of the other. And then my website is spiritofgrace.org. And so you can see a lot of stuff and have access to a lot of audio recordings and articles on that. So, yeah, we're out there for sure doing our little part. And I know you are as well, Dr. Tony, and appreciate you. And there's just a lot of guys in your time. You've gotten to know some of the real big guys. So that's pretty cool. I was interviewed by Dr. Berry once, but most of these guys I've just seen from afar. But
that's right.
It's nice. There's a number of us that are all saying the same thing. I'm not the doctor, but I'm the cheerleader, and saying, listen to this doctor and this doctor and this
That's
doctor
right.
and this nutritionist. They know what they're talking about.
That's fair. Well, one doctor I think you should meet sooner than later that I'll introduce you to is Dr. Brian Linskis with the Low Carb MD, because he has his Best Life Medicine podcast, and it's all spiritually based. So I think that would be a good place for you guys to connect and maybe share your story, where he tries to deviate a little bit from low carb, but it's really an opportunity for people to share their faith. So I think that'll be the first connection I make for you. Okay.
Okay, so, sounds good.
Yeah, so I appreciate you. Thanks again. And as I wrap up, I hope those who are watching or listening to this great conversation with Dennis are inspired, and mostly inspired to understand you don't have to be this guy with a degree, a doctor, a nurse. You just have to have a story to tell, and his story is helping people to beat diabetes, a story of restoration, a story of healing. And if you have a story to tell, you can do exactly what Dennis is doing. So if you know anybody who needs to hear this message of healing, make sure to share this episode. And most importantly, refer them to Beat Diabetes on YouTube. I think that that'll be a great place to kind of get a feel for this great person in front of us, while also maybe having them check out one of his books, which will share his story of healing. So I really appreciate everybody who takes time out of their day to listen to me and my guests, and I appreciate that. And as I conclude, I only ask that you guys continue to be safe, be well, and continue to protect your nest. You've been listening to Protecting Your Nest with Dr. Tony Hampton. For more, visit drtonyhampton.com.